You do not meet people by accident. You summon them. The ones who betray you, abandon you, manipulate you, these are not strangers to your soul. They are mirrors. They are messengers. They are fragments of your forgotten self, returning in human form. The wrong people appear not to ruin you, but to reveal you. Until you see the unconscious pattern that calls them forth, you will confuse attraction with fate. But what if the one who hurts you was never sent to harm you, but to hand you back what you lost inside? This is not a lesson in relationships. This is an initiation into shadow, projection, and the self. And it begins where every real transformation begins, with the courage to say, this is not about them. This is about me. Introduction. A woman walks through a long corridor lined with mirrors. Some mirrors reflect admiration, others indifference. One echoes desire, another betrayal. Each mirror seems to shapeshift, revealing faces of strangers who are somehow familiar. But then she stands before a mirror that shows no face, only shadows. As she stares into the darkness, something moves. Not a stranger, but an ancient presence. A figure she had once banished, a fragment of herself. This is the mirror of relationship. And the figures who appear in it, lovers, enemies, companions, traitors, are not drawn by chance, they are summoned. Modern man, in his desperate quest for love, is plagued by a recurring lament. Why do I keep attracting the wrong people? He speaks this as though the universe were cruel, as though his suffering were unjust, accidental, external. Yet he fails to ask the deeper question, the one that turns the mirror inward. What in me has called them? For the psyche does not choose randomly. It obeys the deeper necessity of wholeness. That which is unintegrated, unlived, or unacknowledged within us becomes magnetized in outer form. The ego, unaware of its own limitations, believes that it is seeking connection, but the unconscious is seeking confrontation. It draws to us those who reflect what we cannot yet see. This is the paradox of psychological life. The wrong person is not a mistake. They are a messenger. They are the embodiment of a lesson the self has ordained. Until that message is received, the pattern repeats, and the pattern repeats. What we reject within becomes magnetized without. A man who denies his vulnerability may be drawn to partners who exploit it. A woman who disowns her power may unconsciously serve those who abuse theirs. These are not failures of judgment. These are expressions of inner division, of psychic truths attempting to become conscious through relational suffering. To imagine that healing lies in finding the right person is to remain caught in illusion. For even the right person, if summoned from an unconscious place, becomes a projection. No true relationship can occur until we have first related to ourselves, until we have faced the mirror and recognized what is looking back. You must understand, this exploration is not about romance nor about advice. It is not a prescription for choosing partners nor a critique of social dynamics. It is a descent into the underworld of the psyche where the shadows live. A descent into the place where attraction is not a whim, but a wound seeking witness. Where love is not given, but demanded by the self in the crucible of transformation. I have observed this truth in countless dreams, in patients, and in myself. The human being longs for union, but the ego does not know with whom. It is the self that chooses, through symbols, through patterns, through encounters that defy logic, but are charged with meaning. To change who you attract, you must understand who you are beneath the mask. You must withdraw from the external drama and begin to decode the inner play. The people who enter your life are not random. They are archetypal. They are the daimonic actors of your unfinished inner theater. Some represent the abandoned child, some the tyrannical father, some the seductive anima or the destructive animus. All of them are real, but none of them are what they seem. This work will not give you new rules for dating. It will not help you win love or avoid pain. It will demand that you understand what love and pain truly are, that you see how your suffering is the soul's signal, that you recognize your attraction not as preference, but as prophecy. And so we begin, not with answers, but with questions. What do the wrong people in your life reveal? What have they mirrored that you refuse to see? Why do they appear at the very moment you think you are ready for something new? And most of all, what is in you that still believes you are unworthy of peace? There is a law in the psyche, a law as precise as gravity, and that law is this: what is unconscious will be lived as fate. Until you meet the content within, it will meet you without, in the form of those you love, hate, worship, or lose. The way out is not to run faster, it is to turn toward the shadow, to listen to the whisper behind the attraction, to ask, what does this encounter awaken in me? Not about the other, about you, about the one who stands in the mirror, still afraid to be seen. And if you can bear to look, truly look, not just at the face of the other, but at the face beneath your persona, you will begin to see the deeper meaning of every wrong person you have ever met. They were never strangers, they were thresholds. Let us begin. Part 1. The law of psychological correspondence. The psyche is not a passive receiver of experience. It is the silent architect of encounter. What we call life events, coincidence, or attraction are often outer expressions of an inner symmetry. Just as the alchemist believed in the unity between the macrocosm and the microcosm, the unconscious composes its reflection in the world of relationships, not randomly, but symbolically, necessarily. There is a psychic law at work, an echo of the ancient axiom, as within, so without. But while the mystic turns to stars and signs, I turn to the images of the soul, dreams, neuroses, fixations. These show us that which is not made conscious will be lived as fate. And nowhere does this become more visible than in the realm of human connection. Consider the recurring attraction to those who cannot see you, who abandon, who control. The ego cries, why them again? But the question is mistaken. The real inquiry must be, what part of me calls them? The unconscious, when ignored, does not disappear. It animates the outer world through projection, fantasy, and encounter. In this way, the people who enter your life are not merely others. They are emissaries. They carry psychic content you have not yet dared to face. They act out what you have left unlived. A man comes to me broken. He has fallen once again for a woman who offers love like a riddle, mysterious, partial, always just beyond reach. He tells me she reminds him of no one, but as we speak, his eyes darken. He recalls his father, a man of few words, often absent, whose affection came only in fragments. The connection is not conscious, but the psyche remembers. The pattern repeats. In dreams, he sees her as a statue, cold, beautiful, unmoving. And behind her, a boy knocking at a locked door. The dream does not lie. It tells him, you do not love the woman, you love the wound. We are not drawn to people because they are good for us. We are drawn because they are symbolic, because they constellate something within, a forgotten pain, a frozen desire, an archetypal pattern. This is why one can be surrounded by kind, available people and feel nothing, and then fall magnetically for one who wounds, disturbs, or rejects. The unconscious seeks reunion, not comfort. From this perspective, love is not preference, it is psychic necessity. In mythology, we find this in the tale of Echo and Narcissus. Narcissus does not reject Echo out of cruelty. He cannot see her. He sees only himself, reflected in the water. He is blind to the other because he has never encountered his own soul. He is possessed by an inner image that no outer person can fulfill. So too in life, when we are identified with our wounds, our projections, or our unmet needs, we cannot relate, we repeat. And in that repetition, we suffer. The woman who always finds herself caretaking, depleted, needed but never nourished, is living out the pattern of the sacrificial mother, imposed not from without, but from within. The man who moves from one passionate affair to the next, never able to sustain love once the fire fades, is possessed by the archetype of the puer aeternus, the eternal boy who flees the burden of intimacy. These are not choices in the ordinary sense. They are compulsions. They are the psyche's attempt to awaken consciousness through drama. You do not simply attract the wrong people. You attract the parts of yourself you have not yet met. And the moment this becomes conscious, the spell begins to break. But the ego resists this truth. It wants to believe in logic, in personal agency, in the innocence of victimhood. It does not want to see that it is complicit, not guilty, but responsible, not wrong, but unfinished. This is the first wound in the journey of transformation, to recognize that your life is not happening to you, it is happening through you. The soul calls the characters onto the stage, and until you understand the role each one plays in your psychic drama, they will return with different names, different faces, but the same lesson. Do not ask, why did they hurt me? Ask, What in me remained unconscious that allowed this pattern to unfold? The ego will hate this. It will cry, but I was innocent. And in one sense it is true, but innocence does not mean wholeness. Innocence often means ignorance of the shadow, of the complexes, of the history that lives in our bones. You are not to blame for the suffering, but you are responsible for the meaning you make of it. The wrong people are not enemies of your destiny. They are initiators. They constellate the very qualities you must integrate to become whole. And so we must stop asking how to avoid the wrong people and begin asking how to see what they reveal. Let us now descend further into the next chamber of the soul's labyrinth, where projection becomes a mirror and the shadow speaks not through nightmares, but through the eyes of those we once thought we loved. Part 2, Projection and the Shadow of Love. When the psyche cannot bear to see a truth within, it casts that truth outward. This is projection, not merely a psychological mechanism, but a symbolic act of the unconscious. It is the soul's attempt to make visible what remains disavowed. And nowhere is projection more potent, more dramatic, and more wounding than in the domain of human intimacy. One does not fall in love with another person. One falls in love with one's own image, reflected, distorted, adorned by the psyche in the other. The other becomes the screen. The content comes from within. If what is projected is the golden, idealized self, then the other becomes a god or goddess, exalted beyond reality. If what is projected is the repressed shadow, then the other becomes the deceiver, the destroyer, the demon. In both cases, one does not see the other. One sees the unseen self. This is why relationships, especially those marked by intensity and confusion, are rarely about the present moment. They are psychic theaters. The so-called wrong person is not an intruder. They are a mirror reflecting what the ego cannot yet admit. A woman comes to me tormented. She is drawn again and again to men who lie, withdraw, betray. She calls them cowards, but in her dreams she is not the victim. She is the thief. She sneaks through houses in the night, stealing from men who lie sleeping. One day she dreams she is caught by a figure in the mirror. It is herself, but with a face like the moon, cold, luminous, judging. The dreams speak clearly. She has projected her own cunning, her fear of truth, her need to dominate from the shadows. She hates it in them because she cannot face it in herself. This is the core of shadow projection. We meet in others what we most fear, or what we secretly long to become. The myth of Bluebeard offers a profound insight. The young bride is given the keys to her husband's house with one forbidden room. Of course, she opens it. Inside, she finds the bodies of the women who came before. He discovers her disobedience and threatens her life. But she calls upon her sisters and survives. This is no simple tale of cruelty. Bluebeard is the shadow. The room is the unconscious. The warning is against seeing what one is not yet ready to integrate. The feminine figure, innocent, curious, brave, is the ego. To see the truth is to risk death symbolically, the death of illusions, of projections, of the lie of perfect union. To confront the shadow is to awaken. And the wrong person, in many cases, is the gatekeeper of this awakening. They lure us not into love, but into dissent. They wound not because they are evil, but because the soul uses them to break the ego's fantasy. The shadow appears in countless forms, sometimes as the cruel lover, sometimes as the absent father figure, sometimes as the chaotic partner who mirrors our own inner fragmentation. It is tempting to blame them, and indeed, some will act destructively, but we must remember, the force that drew them in was not random. It was archetypal. It served a deeper function. We cannot become conscious of the shadow without pain, for the shadow is not just darkness. It is everything we have lost, denied, disowned. It is the power we gave up to be loved, the voice we silenced to be safe, the desires we abandoned to be accepted. When we meet someone who awakens these qualities, who triggers our rage, our longing, our fear, we are being called not to escape, but to turn inward. A man dreams of a snarling dog chained in his basement. The dog breaks free and runs into the street, biting strangers. He wakes in terror. Later, he realizes this is his own aggression, his own need to assert, to protect, to claim space. He has buried it for years beneath politeness. But now it erupts, not within, but through others. He tells me he is always drawn to dominant women who humiliate him. I tell him he has been casting his inner dog onto them. He must now face it, befriend it, learn to walk with it. This is the task of shadow integration, to reclaim what was once exiled. Until then, we are doomed to seek it in the other. and to suffer its distortions. Projection is not love, it is self-encounter through illusion. And so, the question becomes, how does one know when one is projecting? The signs are clear, when attraction is immediate and overwhelming, when the other seems perfect or perfectly awful, when one cannot see their humanity, only their symbolic function, when one repeats the same pattern despite new faces, when dreams become turbulent, when the body feels both ecstatic and betrayed. These are not signs of true love, they are signs of archetypal activation. To withdraw projection is to take back one's soul, but the ego will resist. Projection flatters the ego, it allows it to remain unchanged. It lets one remain the victim or the hero or the rescuer. But to see the other clearly is to risk seeing oneself anew. The hardest thing is to look at the wrong person and ask, what part of me lived in them? Was it my denied ambition, my unacknowledged cruelty, my yearning for chaos, my need to control, my fear of abandonment? These are not easy questions, but they are the questions that lead to freedom. For when the projection is withdrawn, the shadow does not vanish, it becomes available. The aggression becomes boundary, the longing becomes purpose, the chaos becomes creativity, and the person once seen as villain or savior fades into perspective. They were never the goal, they were the mirror. Let us now step further into the deeper strata of repetition, where the child's longing for healing writes the same story again and again, until the soul finds the courage to stop reading the script and begin to author a new one. Part 3, repetition, compulsion and the wound of the child. Within the human soul there lies a wound so old it no longer bleeds. It repeats. Repetition is the language of the unconscious. When something is not made conscious, it does not disappear. It recurs, not to torment us, but to heal through reenactment what could not be born in its original form. This is the law of repetition compulsion, and it governs the field of human relationship with relentless, unconscious precision. One does not simply attract the wrong person. One is drawn, like iron to magnet, by the gravitational pull of an old psychic wound, usually from childhood, seeking redemption, recognition, or reversal. The psyche seeks not pleasure, but meaning, and often that meaning lies buried in a pain that has not yet been faced. This is not Freudian determinism, this is archetypal necessity. As long as the child within us remains unseen, unmet, unheard, he or she will continue to summon partners, friends, or lovers who echo the original fracture. A woman repeatedly falls in love with men who abandon her. She sees it as bad luck, but her dreams betray a deeper truth. Night after night, she stands at a station, waving at a train that never stops. Then, one night, she is on the train and her father is on the platform. This time she does not wave, she screams. The wound is not of adulthood, but of the inner child left behind by a father who was physically present but emotionally absent. That ungrieved absence now structures her romantic life. Each abandonment is not new. It is a rehearsal of a play that began before she could speak. Complexes are the living splinters of the psyche. They are not mere memories. They are autonomous fragments, feeling-toned clusters of psychic energy that carry the emotional charge of past experience. When activated, they seize control of the personality. One is no longer reacting to the present, but reliving the past. A man attracts partners who belittle and criticize him. He sees himself as cursed. But under analysis, he reveals a mother who praised him in public, but scolded him in private. Love was always conditional. The message was clear: be impressive or be rejected. Now he seeks not a partner, but a witness. A mother who will finally love him without performance. He does not realize he is not in relationship, he is in ritual, and the ritual is always the same. Idealization, performance, collapse. Repetition is not failure, it is the soul's insistence. The Greeks knew this. In the myth of Orestes, the son is haunted by the Furies after avenging his father's death. He did what was just, yet he is tormented. Why? Because the psyche does not care for justice alone. It seeks balance, reconciliation, wholeness. The hauntings cease only when Orestes confronts the ancestral curse and undergoes trial, not by weapons, but by awareness. So it is with us. Until we name the wound, it names our relationships. This is why self-blame and surface analysis fail. The question is not, why did I choose them, but what part of me needed them to appear? What inner image of love, pain, or identity were they reenacting? The child within seeks healing by repetition, but the repetition cannot heal, only consciousness can. One must grieve not the person who left or betrayed or harmed, but the part of oneself that has waited so long for someone to do it differently. A woman dreams of being locked in a house with no doors. She screams, but no one hears. She wakes in tears. In waking life, she is in a relationship with a man who refuses to communicate. The dream is not about him. It is about the part of her that has never been heard, not by a partner, but by her own inner world. She is still waiting for someone to open the door, but the door was never outside. It was always within. When we repeatedly attract the wrong person, we are being offered a mirror, not of them, but of ourselves as we were, before we could protect or articulate. This is why understanding alone is insufficient. The wound must be felt, grieved, met not with insight, but with presence. To stop attracting the wrong people, one must become the right person for the wounded child within. One must become the adult who sees, hears, and embraces the pain that others unconsciously echo. Only then does the psyche relinquish the repetition. Only then does the soul cease its cry for recognition. When that happens, the wrong people begin to vanish, not because they were defeated, but because their work is done. Let us now turn to the deeper figures who shape this terrain, the anima and animus, who when unconscious become inner tyrants, and when integrated become guides to authentic love. Part 4, the anima and animus as inner tyrants. Deep within every man lives a woman, not of flesh, but of soul, and within every woman lives a man, not as body, but as voice. These figures are the anima and the animus. They are not gendered in the biological sense, but in the symbolic function they serve in the psychic totality. They are the soul images that mediate between the ego and the self, and in their unconscious state, they possess terrible power. When we are unaware of these figures, they do not remain silent. They dominate. The anima, when unconscious in the man, seduces and deceives. She clouds judgment with longing and idealization. The animus, when unconscious in the woman, judges and dominates. He speaks in absolutes, in cold certainties. Both turn love into illusion and attraction into tyranny. A man becomes intoxicated by a woman not because she is who she is, but because she is the bearer of his inner soul image, his anima. She glows with significance, not her own, but his. She becomes muse, siren, goddess, not partner. And inevitably, she disappoints, for she cannot sustain the weight of his projection. And the woman, she seeks in men not flesh and character, but a voice to silence her doubt. She is drawn to the decisive, the arrogant, the man who knows. But this is not love. It is a search for her own lost clarity, a longing to externalize the authority she has not yet claimed within. And when this man turns rigid or cruel, she calls it betrayal, but it is her own animus, unmet, now manifest. These are not rare pathologies. They are the norm of unconscious love. A case comes to mind. A woman, bright and intuitive, is caught in cycles of intense passion, followed by emotional devastation. She says, "Every man I love turns into something else." In dreams, she is led by a beautiful man into a labyrinth, only to find herself alone in darkness. Through analysis, the pattern becomes clear. The animus, projected outward, draws her to men who mirror her own unlived ambition and clarity. But they become cruel because her inner animus remains a tyrant, unrefined. She never had a dialogue with this figure within, so he possessed her relationships without. Another patient, a man, recounts a lifetime of seeking the perfect woman, a woman he insists must exist if only he searches hard enough. He describes her, graceful, understanding, endlessly accepting, but when he meets a woman who begins to show independence, challenge, or even ordinary flaws, he recoils. She's not the one. He dreams of a lake, clear and calm. A woman floats in it, glowing, but when he approaches, the water darkens and she vanishes. This is the anima in her unconscious form, not guide, but illusion. She calls him not toward love, but toward fantasy. And so, no woman is ever real. They are all measured against an inner image he has never questioned. Until the anima and animus are made conscious, they rule our relationships from below. They are the voices that whisper, "This is the one," or "This is wrong," without discernment. They compel us toward those who match the image, not the person. In myth, this is the story of Pygmalion, who falls in love with a statue. But the statue is not a woman, it is a projection, a form sculpted by his longing. When Aphrodite brings it to life, it is not a gift, it is a warning. Love based on projection becomes a prison. The anima must be transformed from image to function. She must no longer be goddess, but guide. The animus must cease to lecture and begin to converse. Only then can one enter relationship, not as a seeker of completion, but as a bearer of wholeness. There are signs of tyranny. If your relationships begin with intoxication and end in resentment, if your lovers seem to shift into strangers, if you speak of soulmates too easily, these are signs the inner figures are unrecognized. And when they are not faced inwardly, they project outwardly. But how does one begin the process of withdrawal? First, by noticing the pattern, the attraction that feels fated, the chemistry that overrides all reason. These are often not signals of depth, but of possession. Second, by entering dialogue, not with the person outside, but the image within. In dreams, in journaling, in active imagination, allow the inner figure to speak. What does she say? What does he demand? You will find that these voices often carry the beliefs you inherited about gender, about power, about love. They are not you, but they live in you. When you begin this inner work, something shifts. You begin to see others more clearly, not as carriers of your longing, but as beings with their own psyche, their own mystery. You stop needing them to fulfill a script. You begin to love. In one patient, the transformation was visible. She once spoke of love as fire, as fate, but after years of inner work with her animus, she said simply, I want a partner I can speak with, someone who sees me and whom I can see. She no longer needed a rescuer. She no longer feared solitude. The animus had become a counselor, not a dictator. The integration of anima and animus is not about eliminating romance. It is about freeing it from fantasy, from compulsion, from the unconscious tyranny of unmet needs. Only then can two people meet as themselves, not as projections, not as halves seeking a whole, but as souls already on the path to wholeness, walking together, not to complete, but to witness. Let us now step into the furnace of emotional pain itself. For when the projections begin to crack and the relationships shatter, it is not the end, it is the beginning of alchemical transformation. Part 5, the alchemy of emotional pain. There is a silence that descends after the collapse of a relationship, not merely an outer parting, but an inner fracture. The beloved becomes the betrayer, the ideal becomes the wound, and the light of infatuation gives way to the night of the soul. This silence is not empty, it is full. It echoes with the shattered images of what once seemed certain. Most seek escape, they call it closure, but the psyche does not obey the ego's urgency. It descends, it dismembers, it dissolves. What follows the breaking is what the old alchemists called the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of putrefaction, where all that once held shape begins to rot into the undifferentiated soil of transformation. The ego mourns its illusions, and it must mourn, for this is not failure, it is initiation. Pain, in this context, is not a signal of error. It is the cry of the soul demanding attention. When the wrong person leaves, they often leave behind something more disturbing than absence. They leave a mirror, and in it, one sees not just their image, but one's own participation in the drama. One sees the longing that was projected, the hunger that was masked as love, the blindness that mistook resemblance for recognition. A woman dreams that she is climbing a mountain, pulling a heavy bag behind her. At the summit, she opens the bag, and it is full of ash. All her effort, she says, has come to nothing. But the dream says otherwise. The ash is not emptiness. It is what remains after fire. The ego burns, and from its ash, the self may rise. The ego believes pain is pointless, but the psyche does not waste suffering. In alchemy, nothing is lost. Every failure, every humiliation, every betrayal becomes part of the vas hermeticum, the sealed vessel within which transformation takes place. The emotions that threaten to destroy us are the very materials of our rebirth. But not all pain transforms, only the pain that is allowed to speak. This requires a reversal of attitude, not asking, why did they do this to me? But what is being asked of me now? Not how do I avoid this again? But what in me made this necessary? A man devastated by abandonment begins dreaming of his childhood home. The windows are broken, the walls are covered in moss. He avoids entering. Week after week, the dream recurs. Finally, he walks through the door and finds in the basement a locked box. Inside is a photograph of himself as a boy weeping. His grief was not for the woman who left, it was for the child who was left before her. The partner had become the carrier of a wound far older than the relationship. Her betrayal reopened what had never healed. The pain was the key. This is the alchemical truth. The loss of the beloved is the revelation of the unloved within. The wrong person, by wounding us, makes visible the wound we could not name. They do not cause it, they constellate it. And when this is seen, suffering becomes meaningful. The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. We are not initiated through comfort. We are initiated through collapse. And in collapse, the fragments are not swept away. They are examined, they are named, and slowly they are reassembled, not into the former image, but into something new. This process cannot be bypassed. The temptation is great to rush into distraction, to medicate, to seek a new lover as an antidote to the old. But every flight from pain is a postponement of transformation. The psyche is patient. It will return the same lesson, the same figure in a different form until it is learned. There is in this work no promise of happiness, but there is the promise of depth. The person who has suffered consciously becomes capable of love that is no longer desperate, no longer clinging, no longer blind. And there is a moment, quiet, often unnoticed, when the pain no longer defines the story. It becomes part of the landscape, not a wound, but a scar, not a cry, but a memory. The one who was broken begins to walk, not away from the past, but with it. This is the birth of psychological maturity, not the absence of pain, but the capacity to carry it without collapse, to hold the memory without resentment, to remember not just the hurt, but the meaning it revealed. The wrong person in this view was never wrong. They were exact. They were the emissary of the unconscious. They came as an answer to a question the ego did not know it had asked. And when their role is complete, they leave or they remain transformed, not as fantasy, not as torment, but as symbol, as reminder, as teacher. Thus, in the furnace of emotional pain, something is being forged. Not the next relationship, not the perfected ego, but the soul's capacity for truth. And it is this truth, slowly born through suffering, that prepares the way for the next stage, the withdrawal of projection and the first glimpse of wholeness. Part 6, withdrawal of projection, becoming psychologically whole. There comes a moment in the descent when the seeker, exhausted not by others, but by the pursuit itself, turns inward. The eyes no longer scan the horizon for the savior or the answer. The question itself begins to dissolve, and what was once clung to as fate begins to reveal itself as reflection. The withdrawal of projection is one of the most critical thresholds of individuation. It is not a conscious act of rejection, it is a transformation of perception. That which once burned with idealization, that which once raged with blame, now appears in neutral light. The spell is broken. The image returns to its source. This return is not romantic, it is not cathartic, it is sober. To see the beloved not as betrayal, not as perfection, but as projection is to begin the difficult work of reclaiming the soul's fragmented contents. Consider a man who has spent years pursuing women who embody nurturing and tenderness, only to find himself repeatedly left in emotional starvation. Through analysis, he realizes he has externalized the mother image, projected it onto every lover, and demanded from them what his inner life lacked. When the projection collapses, he grieves, not merely the woman, but the mother he never truly had. He mourns the illusion that love would finally complete what was broken. I call this mourning the sacrifice of the hero. The ego must relinquish its fantasy of completion through the other. This is the death of romantic inflation, and it feels like death. But it is the first moment of psychic rebirth. Dreams begin to shift, the idealized figure fades. In its place, solitude, forests, ancient houses, deep water, symbols of the inner world now ready to be inhabited. One patient described a dream where she sits in a ruined church. Rain pours through the broken roof. She is alone, soaked and waiting. Yet in the silence, she hears something beneath the stones, music, not loud, but steady. The self is beginning to sing. This music is not for distraction. It is not a new narrative. It is the tone of integration. For when the projection dissolves, what returns is not emptiness, but energy. The qualities once attributed to the other, their confidence, their cruelty, their vitality, their darkness, are now seen as parts of the self. Not all are pleasant, but all are necessary, for the self is not one-sided. It is not good, it is whole. A woman dreams of confronting her ex-lover in a theater. He is on stage, acting. She walks backstage and finds a mirror. In the reflection, it is she who wears the costume. The message is clear. She was not watching someone else. She was watching herself, projected onto the screen of the other. To withdraw projection is to dismantle the illusion that love is out there. It is the beginning of love within, not narcissism, but authenticity. For only when the self is no longer divided can it relate to another without demand, without distortion. This withdrawal is painful. It is disillusionment in the truest sense, the loss of illusion. But only what was illusory is lost. What remains is the capacity to see, not with the eyes of longing, but with the eyes of being. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But until projection is withdrawn, there is no true meeting, only mutual hypnosis. When you stop needing someone to mirror what you cannot see in yourself, you become capable of genuine encounter. You no longer require them to be your ideal, your enemy, your redeemer. You allow them to be, and in doing so, you begin to be as well. The transformation that follows this is quiet. It is not a revelation, it is a recognition. The symbols return, the same dreams, the same patterns, but now with a different gaze. The dog no longer chases, the child no longer hides, the house is no longer haunted, because the ego, once so desperate for completion, now begins to recognize its own shape. The psyche, no longer throwing its contents outward, begins to contain itself. This is not isolation, it is integration. The woman who once fled abandonment now sits with her loneliness. The man who feared failure now dialogues with his inadequacy. The shadow is not vanquished, it is welcomed. Relationships change, not because the world changes, but because the lens through which one sees has been cleansed of distortion. The drama loses its grip, the repetition weakens, and in the stillness, a new kind of longing emerges, not for escape, not for salvation, but for resonance. The wrong people no longer arrive, not because fate has improved, but because the need for them is gone. The unconscious, having been met within, no longer needs to appear without. This is the quiet miracle of psychological work. That which once appeared as destiny was projection all along. And what is retrieved in its place is something infinitely more valuable, freedom. Not from pain, but from compulsion. The one who once waited for the right person now waits for nothing. And in this waiting, not impatient, not expectant, love may arrive, or not. But if it does, it will not be salvation, it will be meeting, it will be mutual presence, it will be human, and from this wholeness a new possibility emerges, one not born of fantasy, but of choice. Let us move forward. Part 7, the return to relationship, from compulsion to choice. When the projections dissolve and the unconscious content begins to integrate, relationship no longer arises out of need. It becomes the natural extension of the self's wholeness. It is no longer a hunt for completion, but a dance of resonance. The one who once attracted from hunger now attracts from silence, and in this silence, only what is true can respond. The psyche, now no longer divided, no longer craves fusion. It begins to differentiate, to discern. This is not detachment, but the birth of a new kind of intimacy, one rooted in mutual recognition, not mutual possession. Relationship is the crucible of individuation, but it is not always the beginning of it. True relationship becomes possible only after a certain psychic coherence is achieved. Otherwise, the other remains a surface for projection, a mirror for illusion, a stage for reenactment. Consider a man who spent decades entangled with women he either worshipped or resented. After the dissolution of a particularly devastating relationship, he withdrew entirely. But this was no ordinary retreat. It was a conscious withdrawal into himself. He began dream work, active imagination, analysis. Years passed. One night he dreamed of a quiet house in a snowy field. Inside, a woman sat by the fire, not a goddess, not a tyrant, just a woman, warm and grounded. He sat beside her and said nothing. And for the first time, there was no hunger. only peace. This image is not romantic, it is archetypal. The return to relationship must be preceded by the return to self. The psyche does not call the right person as reward. It permits relationship as an expression of the new synthesis, the new inner order. When this return happens, attraction changes form. One is no longer magnetized to chaos, drama, or unavailability. The familiar patterns feel lifeless, not because the world has changed, but because the unconscious no longer seeks completion through them. Instead, one is drawn to stillness, to congruence, to those who do not pull, who do not seduce, but who simply remain. The presence of the other no longer provokes inner fragmentation. It amplifies coherence. Myth speaks of such reunions. Consider the story of Psyche and Eros. In the beginning, love was blind. Eros visited only in darkness. When Psyche's curiosity was punished, the union broke. She wandered through despair, endured trials. Only after descent, purification, and sacrifice was the union restored, now in light, now in consciousness. This is not fairy tale, but psychological sequence. The wrong people belong to the night. The right relationship begins at dawn. There is no finality in this. There is no arrival. The individuated self still suffers, still doubts, still longs, but it no longer seeks to be filled. It seeks to be met. And what of the right person? They are not a savior. They are not destiny. They are a fellow traveler. Their presence does not fix but reflects. They are not immune to your shadow, but they do not carry it. They are not archetype, but individual. And in this ordinariness lies the miracle of genuine connection. Let us not mistake this for perfection. Two individuating souls still struggle, still wound, but the difference is awareness. There is space, there is dialogue, there is the capacity to say, this is mine, and to hear, that is yours. The new relationship is a crucible still, but now of transformation, not repetition. It burns not to destroy, but to refine. I emphasize that the self is a union of opposites. It is never purity, it is never stability, it is tension held consciously, and so too is love. To return to relationship after individuation is to return with eyes open, with the heart no longer seeking salvation, but expression. A woman, once drawn to men who mirrored her wounded father, begins to attract those with presence. She is no longer dazzled by charisma. She listens instead for silence, for the voice that does not shout, for the gaze that does not demand. She dreams of a well in the forest. It is deep, dark, and calm. This is her new center. This is the love she now seeks. This transformation is not strategy. It cannot be taught. It emerges from dissent, from work, from patience. The wrong people disappear when they are no longer summoned. The right ones appear when one becomes capable of seeing. And yet even this distinction dissolves. Right and wrong become categories of the old mind. Now there is only resonance or dissonance. There is no blame, there is no fantasy, there is the real. To love from this place is to love freely, not without risk, but without compulsion. Not without fear, but with awareness of fear. Not because the other completes you, but because they reflect the completeness you are learning to hold. This is the voice of the mature soul, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. It says, I have walked with shadows, I have sat with ghosts, I have wept for illusions, and now I am here, I see you. I do not need you to be anything but what you are, and if you can see me too, then let us walk, side by side, not as saviors, but as souls who remember what it means to return whole. Here the journey ends, and here another begins. Let us walk now, not toward completion, but toward communion.